Welcome to another episode of the Policy Center Live. Today, our guest is Dr. Ron Rainey, Extension Economist, Professor and Assistant Vice President for the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture. In addition to his administrative duties and outreach for the Cooperative Extension Service, Dr. Rainey is Director of the Southern Risk Management Education Center, whose mission is to educate farmers and ranchers to manage the unique risks of producing food for the world's table. Welcome to the Policy Center Live podcast, Dr. Rainey.
Thank you, Ms. Tanya. I'm excited to be here and excited to delve into some of these questions that you put before me to hopefully help our farmers and ranchers better understand some of the programs that are out there to assist them and aid them in these trying times.
Yes, sir. So just give our audience a little background about your agricultural background.
So I grew up, I'm originally from Arkansas. I grew up, right now I'm currently in Little Rock, Arkansas, but I grew up about an hour northwest of Little Rock in a small rural community where when I was really young, my father had a cow-calf operation. Around the age of 10, kind of transitioned into a timber industry. So worked in pulpwood and logging and extractive services, which has a lot of similarities with agriculture in terms of depending on nature, depending on the environment, climate, and just managing and harvesting natural resources. So that was my background with a farm or ag background, but I also grew up in 4-H and FFA. So very familiar with ag sector, but also really benefited from those experiences, learning skills and getting opportunities to engage and learn broader than where I was, if you will, with 4-H and FFA.
Okay. I want to delve into the Discrimination Financial Assistance Program because that seems to be a very hot piece of legislation right now. Can you just give us a little bit of background about the DFAP and the Inflation Reduction Act in addition to the Justice for Black Farmers Act? I know that's quite a bit, but if you could kind of just break those down for me.
No, I'll be happy to break those down. And it all started with the Biden administration. It's really had a really strong push for equity across government, beyond USDA, across all sectors of government. And so it started with some discussions. There was a Justice for Black Farmers Act that was put together, but it never made it to the floor of the House or the Senate for a vote. But there was some language in there focused on providing some assistance, resources, and programs for Black farmers. As Congress was going through putting together legislation, they took components of the Justice for Black Farmers and they inserted into the American Rescue Plan. And the first piece of that, well, there's two pieces of that. One was the debt forgiveness for FSA borrowers, which I think was 10006. But that section was what was labeled in the media as debt forgiveness for Black farmers. That was an erroneous label because when you looked at the numbers of the number of farmers or the percent of farmers that would get relief from that original American Rescue Plan, it was roughly 50% Native Americans, 30% Hispanic or Latino producers, 18% African American, and 3% Asian and Pacific Islanders. So only 18% of Black farmers were going to benefit from the original provisions in 10006 of the American Rescue Plan, which many of you now know got held up with an injunction in court. And because of that pending court case, what the legislature did was then there was also a provision in there, 10007, that had some market access, some additional funding for socially disadvantaged farmers. That was the term that was used versus Black, socially disadvantaged farmers. And so keep that in mind. And so the criteria from the original American Rescue Plan was socially disadvantaged farmers. And it was only farmers who had received a guaranteed loan from Farm Service Agency, which is an agency of USDA. This would represent that 18% of the farmers who would have got relief was roughly 8% of African American farmers. So only about 8% of Black farmers would have got any kind of relief from the debt forgiveness. So because it was held up with the court case, later Congress moved components because they didn't go get an ultimate decision in that court case because they did not, to my perspective, didn't want to enter in that path because of the unknown of the legal battle. How long would that take? Would it take a year? Would it take 10 years? So later legislation, as they're putting together the Inflation Reduction Act, they took components that were already in that Section 10006 and Section 10007, and they revised those sections and made it the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's Section 22006 and 22007. So debt forgiveness turns into financial relief for distressed borrowers. So any borrower financially distressed as defined by that program, and they were a borrower with an FSA guaranteed loan, would receive assistance. That program has been carried on, I want to say, since October of last year. I can't recall the exact figures of what's been paid out, but I want to say it's over $500 million, but don't hold me on that figure, but that's been going on since October of last year. The other component of that was a Section 22007, which just launched in July, and one of the specific components of that section talked about relief for discrimination. And again, this is discrimination, very broad class. It's any farmer who has faced discrimination from USDA Farm Service Agency prior to January 1, 2021. So I'm going to repeat that. So any farmer who feels that they experienced discrimination prior to January 1, 2021 can apply and fill out the application to say that they have experienced discrimination, and it's only in USDA Farm Service Agency. So if you experience discrimination with other USDA agencies, whether that's Rural Development or NRCS, this is specifically for Farm Service Agency loans and in that office.
And explain to the audience that this is not a lawsuit. Is that correct, Dr. Rainey?
Correct. So this is not a lawsuit. There's been some information that I've heard anecdotally of law firms talking about they can get you included in this class action lawsuit. It's not a class action lawsuit. There's been information that there's been lawyers saying, we will guide you through the application process. We will handle it. And what those law firms may or may not be telling you that they're going to do that for a fee. There's no need for a lawyer. I guess if you feel that you need a lawyer to go through the process to fill out the paperwork, that's one thing. But this application process is free. Go to 22007apply.gov and you can find the details of it. If you don't have internet access, there's a phone number that I'm sure that the Policy Center is going to make available that you can call. Across the Southeast, there's an office open in every state that you can call. And in addition, USDA has some cooperators, which are nonprofit organizations that have a history of working with socially disadvantaged farmers that you can reach out to, and they are providing technical assistance to help farmers and ranchers go through this process. So you don't need a lawyer. This is not a lawsuit, not a class action lawsuit. It is strictly an application process, and there's no fee to apply. All the information on the program is available online at 22007apply.gov. And also on that website, or you can find out by getting that number. And again, I'm sure the Policy Center will have that 1-800 number available for you. But you can find a state level contact or organization in your state across the South. And there's an office in most states, but not every state. There's an office that's set up to intake applications. And so that's the process of applying. Any farmer that's felt discrimination before January 1 of 2021, no fee to apply, no lawyer needed. And they say it's a 40-page application. I've looked at it. I've not went through it in detail, but they say that the bulk of the application is for you to tell your story to help them understand your discrimination case and help them kind of assess and evaluate what level of payment you can receive as a result of that discrimination.
Okay, so let's talk about deadlines, because I was reading on the FAQ that there is a deadline of September 29th, and the application itself is due by October 31st. So kind of go over those deadlines and tell our viewing audience about that.
Yeah, so the program, that web portal open, you can apply either by submitting an application online or by mailing it in. I've heard one presentation from the administrators of the program and also from USDA that they encourage people to enter their application online. One, for the expediency of getting it submitted into the system and knowing that it's in the system, electronically filed, it's there. Two, that they can highlight any issues that may occur. From what I understand, if there's some small errors as you put your application together, there may be some opportunities to make some adjustments as they go through to evaluate it, in terms of just minor errors in terms of how you're understanding a question on the application. But the beauty of applying is that you go through and you can apply either by this online application, or you go out there and under the link on the website of where to apply, there's a link that says how to apply, and you can actually go and download a hard copy of the application to print it out. I would encourage people to print out a hard copy of the application, go through it, lay out your story, understand what resources you may need to put it all together, that you all have it all there available so that you can complete the application. And if you need additional documentation, that's what that September 29th deadline is. And it says on their website, they said you do not need FSA documentation to complete your application. So I just want to stress, I'm going to give this September 29th deadline and some background on it, but please don't let that be a hindrance on you completing the application. September 29th is the deadline for you to contact FSA to say, I need documentation on my specific loan application that I'm referencing in my application. If you get that request in by September 29th, that is to allow FSA enough time to get you that documentation prior to the October 31st, which is the program application deadline. But I want to qualify that by saying FSA has said you don't need to have that documentation. If you can reference it, I believe that they'll be able to pull it up within their records retrieval system to reference any documentation that they may need, and that burden is not on the farmer. So September 29th is the deadline for you to make your request to FSA to get the documentation that you want to include in your application by the application deadline. And the application deadline is the end of October. And the other thing about having the application deadline in is that, so if you submit it online, as long as you get it submitted by 11:59 with 59 seconds, then you met that deadline. If you're submitting it by mail, you got to have it postmarked by October 31st deadline.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit after applications have been submitted? What's the next step? When will farmers be notified of the results, if you will? Kind of talk about that process.
And so that process is a lot less transparent currently. So what they've done is they've divided the country into four distinct regions that are administered by two regional administrators, one regional administrator on the east and one regional administrator on the west. So there's two regions within those regional administrators, and they're all under a structure of a national administrator. And from what I gather on the from reading on the website is that individual farmers will submit in through the regional, one of the four regions of which they reside, and you can find those regions on that discrimination website. You'll submit into that. That regional administrator will take it in. If you're submitting it by mail, they'll make sure to get you some documentation that you have been applied and that you're included in. You have successfully applied. If you're submitting it online, I think you get an immediate response showing that your application has been received. Once they receive them, there's some level of process or review of that application at the regional level. And I think that the regional offices are going to make an initial recommendation on whether or not the application meets the discrimination standards that are set forth. And then that's going to go up to the national administrator, which is going to maybe add additional analysis to the applications. But nationally, as I understand it, is where the ultimate discrimination in the award of financial damages will be finalized. And I've heard that there's going to be no appeals. So the plan is that applications are due by October 31st. Throughout the end of the year, those regional and national administrators are going to go processing and making sure that everybody's applications that are completed are included, and maybe making some minimal contact, as I understand it, to help people make some slight adjustments to make sure that their application is more complete for evaluation. And then in the early spring, that they're planning to start to make payments, to make payouts. That they're going to start doing their evaluation and making their decision prior to the end of 2023. So in early 2024, the goal is to start having payments go out to farmers that have been approved for a payment, and that they're hoping to get that out. They have not given specific dates, only to say that payments will go out in early 2024.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Rainey. Is there some type of measuring tool, I guess, to quantify how much money a farmer will get? And can you just give us an overall, I guess, price point of what the USDA is going to be issuing out?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is not public knowledge. From what I understand, they do have a rubric or a scorecard. And they're trying to evaluate a framework for how they're going to distinguish. So I think, and this is just my perception, that the first step is whether or not discrimination has been proven in the application. Once that is proven, then the second step is what's the level of damages. And my background, I'm an agricultural economist, and I think that within their rubric, they have some things that may reference, for example, the size of the farm in terms of acreage or the number of head that will produce, to kind of get the scale of operation. How many acres are operated? Maybe some things or variables like the value of that agricultural production. And so I think those are some of the standards that they're going to put in. So I can't say USDA hasn't been very transparent on what those standards are. And I don't think that they're going to make it public. I don't think they're going to make any tiered level of awards. I don't think they're going to make that public. And I'm saying that I suspect that that's because they want to minimize gaming of the system, where people say, oh, this is what I need to meet, so here's how I'm going to meet it. Here's a story that's going to meet it. Here's how I get accepted. Here's how I meet this tier. Here's how I meet this next tier. And so, fortunately or unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of subjectivity within this process, but I think that they're going to have frameworks that are going to guide that subjectivity, that will try to ensure transparency and fairness throughout the system and throughout the diverse types of farms, types of agriculture, types of discrimination issues that people have faced in terms of trying to come to a final award award. I guess an award is the term I'll use in each individual case. But the thing I really want to highlight is the one they said they didn't want to go through an appeals process because they roughly have $2 billion dollars if you take away some of the administrative costs for managing it. So of that $2 billion, dollars, the payments going to the farmers and ranchers is going to depend on how many farmers are included in the application process. So they're trying to figure out how many farmers are they going to be required to do payments on, of the percent of farmers that apply, what percent are successful in terms of getting their applications approved. And then once they get that number, then they're going to start thinking about payout levels. And again, I'm purely guesstimating on these tiered systems, but I'm just thinking in terms of how do you reward, say, a small, diversified farmer that may only have 2 acres to maybe a farmer that's operating 2,000 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Similar discrimination case, similar standard, but the level of damage and the opportunity cost, I'm sorry I'm using an economic term, but the lost potential revenue or the lost gains from that loan is going to be differential because of just scale of operation. And so, not sure how they're going to administer that process, but USDA is trying, or the administrators, I think, because I think by the legislation that USDA can't be involved. So the administrators, both that national administrator and those regional administrators, are going to be laying out a framework to where they can come out with a transparent process that at minimum they're consistent in how they treat how people are awarded, but hopefully they're transparent in how they treat people and how they're awarded, to minimize that subjectivity to the point that people can't be taken advantage of. At least that's my hope.
Gotcha. Can we talk about some discrimination cases? Have you worked with, or do you know of any stories of farmers that have been discriminated against, where you see a good case of them getting some relief from this, from the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yeah, I've seen cases, and I'll admit, so I'm an educator within the university, within the land grant system. I'm a 100% extension economist. And extension just means that we take the research and teaching that is done on our land grant university campuses, and we take that out to the farmers, to the ag community. We take it out to those agribusinesses. And so I've had in the nature of being an extension economist and running my center, which serves the entire Southeast region, I've had a number of conversations with farmers. Both small and large scale. And just anecdotally, you hear of stories of farmers that just don't get service. They come into an office and perhaps someone that says, I don't think you would be a good candidate. And they don't even get to fill out an application. And unfortunately, if that happens, to me, that's a standard to a degree. And again, I can't speak to what's going to be accepted and what's not going to be accepted. But then you have something that's a little bit more overt, to where someone actually got to fill out the application and they felt that they provided enough information that they qualified for a loan, and their loan was rejected. And if they feel that discrimination played a role in that loan being rejected, I think that that's an opportunity for a farmer to share and talk about that experience. Whether they felt like they were not getting unbiased treatment in their application process, or maybe that some of the processes or the questions that were asked of them, I'm just thinking very broadly, because again, there's a very broad nature of how these applications are going to come in. And so that is the reason that they say that the application is 40 pages, to allow that unique experience to be told. And you can tell it in a way that someone can say, okay, I can see how that's happened. Now, there will be some additional, I don't know about research or what level of vetting of each individual application, but they'll go through and look at it. And I'm sure they'll look at some things about, maybe if there's a history from a specific office, or maybe if there's been issues, because we all know that a number of farmers have been getting, let's just say, inequitable access and service to programs. But again, this discrimination focuses on the Farm Service Agency and on the loans that they're being offered to clients of USDA.
So what advice or what would you recommend to those farmers who have faced discrimination, who just they're tired of the process and they don't want to fill out the application? What advice would you give to them?
So my advice would be is that these dollars have been awarded, been set aside, they've been appropriated, and the $2 billion will be awarded, and it's going to be based on the number of farmers that are in the pool. I understand if you're frustrated, you have no trust, and you've given up on the system. But if you don't complete an application, I can tell you with certainty that you will not get any funds from these dollars that have been set aside to help address discrimination. So one, I would say complete the application to the best of your ability. Two, I would say reach out to some of the cooperators that are providing technical assistance. Reach out to some of the organizations, even if they're not one of the 8 cooperators, that have helped in the past of providing technical assistance with your operations, to see if they can assist you in completing your application. They may have some personal knowledge of your experiences that can help your memory put your application together, just from some of the support and work that they've done with you over the years. And so I would say reach out to some of those stakeholders that serve, especially those marginalized farmers that have engaged in trying to get access from Farm Service Agency. And I would say at minimum complete the application. And I would say complete it to the best of your ability, and see what happens. Because if you don't complete the application, absolutely nothing will happen.
One last question as it relates to I guess, discrimination, financial assistance. Do you see any other, I guess, loans coming down the pipeline outside of FSA? If this is successful and the money is awarded, do you think there will be other monies that will be awarded to farmers that have, experienced discrimination with other agencies?
That requires a lot of speculation on my part. I wouldn't want to speculate that there's no additional dollars that will flow. I will just look at our political environment. I will look at the current cultural and social tensions that exist, and see how that is playing out in our legislative side through Congress, who would actually have to make the laws and appropriate the dollars if there's additional dollars. And I would just say that there's a very, very small likelihood that there's additional dollars that are going to flow on the discrimination side of marginalized farmers.
Gotcha.
And so that's about as much as I can say, because who knows where we're going with our elections. The bill we mentioned early on in our conversation about the language that was in Justice for Black Farmers, only a few components of the language in that bill, which never could even get to the floor for a vote, were actually pulled and put into other legislation in an effort to try to provide some level of assistance for Black farmers.
I got you. Any final thoughts you want to share on the DFAP, Dr. Rainey?
Yeah, I would just say, it's I know there's a number of frustration, and this is just from feedback that I've heard from people that have tried to understand the process, the system, the layout, the framework, and there's a number of frustrations there. One, I will say that I know personally that those frustrations are being echoed up to not only USDA, but also those administrators. And because of that low probability that there is additional funds, there's a number of advocates that are pleading with USDA and that are pleading with these administrators that you get this program right, that you do all that you can to try to make sure that you have a system that's going to treat people fairly. People that haven't been treated fairly in the past, and people that haven't been treated fairly in some of even the class action lawsuits that have come up. So there's a number of advocates trying to pressure and encourage USDA and these administrators to get this program right. But we need the applications. They need those stories. At the end of the day, one, to make awards, and two, to help also just to help highlight the overarching wrongs, cumulatively, the wrongs that have been done. So I would say I understand some of your frustration. I've seen the looks on many farmers, and it's a similar look that I saw on the face of my father when he was at the cow-calf, or the look on my face of my mother, when you know that things just aren't treated the same for you. But I would say that as we go and move forward with this process, I would just encourage as many farmers as possible that have been mistreated to come state their case. And I don't want to say hope for the best, because I also think that one of the things that we can do with this program and this legislation is hopefully set a stage that we can start kind of changing the tide, because the other hurdle that is before us is basically the disappearance or the extinction of Black farmers. If you look at the average age of farmers across the U.S., it's 57, 58. If you look across African American farmers, it's 65. If we don't get new and beginning farmers, Black farmers, to start engaging in agriculture, if we don't do things to help sustain those farms that are already in existence, we truly will become extinct as those production participants within the agricultural sector. So I would encourage as many of our farmers, and we're already small numbers. If you go back to 1920, African Americans were 14% of the population. They were 14% of the farmers. Almost 1 million Black farmers in 1920. And because of some systemic issues, because of some market issues, that number is now down to almost around 1%.
So what, 40,000, less than 40,000?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so to me is, how do we start having those conversations about reinvigorating and increasing that number to get back up to where, and we may not get back up to where we have Black farmers that are the same percent as we are in the population, but we absolutely can get well beyond the 1 or the 1.5% that we represent today, to get way beyond that, because agriculture has changed. And it is my hope, and I know there's struggle, but it's my hope that USDA has changed as well.
Well, let's just hope so. That's a lot of information you've given us, Dr. Rainey. Thank you so much for that. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about your being the director of the Southern Risk Management Education Center. Kind of talk about that, because you are a stakeholder with the Policy Center, and just kind of tie in your duties as an advisory board member in that regard, and just the work that you all do.
No, great. I've been on the advisory board for, wow, I can't remember when I started, but I want to say shortly after the board was established. And so to me, the Policy Center's advisory board is a comprehensive collection of the stakeholders that represent agriculture for minority farmers, but specifically for African American farmers. You have representation from USDA, you have representation from land grant colleges and universities, both 1862 and 1890. a heavy emphasis on 1890 representation. You have farmers, ranchers, you have community-based organization leaders, you have past officials of USDA. And collectively, I think that across both public and private sector, you have across the entire food value chain representation that can speak to the perspectives and the experiences and the struggles that minority farmers, that socially disadvantaged farmers face across the country. And they're actively engaged, highly professional, highly committed individuals that are committed to trying to look at what are the systems what are the systems across USDA, across government doing? What are the programs in terms of access and availability and impact? What are they doing? And so, as a policy center, the policy center's goal is to try to make recommendations. Oftentimes, do some research studies where they collect data to try to undergird or be the foundation of their recommendation, but try to enhance the policies, public policy, programs, and processes that impact those socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. So, very excited to be a part of that group. I've grown tremendously being a part of that group, and I'm happy that I'm amongst its team, uh, networking and fellowshipping and broadening my perspective of the issues that our farmers and ranchers face across the country. Within the Policy Center, I serve as on the committee, currently chair their research subcommittee, trying to actually help think through some of the research issues that they're trying to highlight and having some more focused discussion from our subcommittee that we bring up to the board for recommendations. And so it's been a fantastic journey that I truly enjoy and grow from. And I want to say that it's making a difference in terms of the recommendations that they're putting forth and some of the changes that they're trying to urge that USDA makes with its programs and policies.
So we recently just had our advisory board meeting in Biloxi, and the Farm Bill is a very hot topic of discussion. What are some of the issues or concerns you'd like to see corrected in the Farm Bill?
And so the Farm Bill is a federal bill that occurs roughly every 5 years, but it governs all USDA programs. All USDA programs are authorized in the Farm Bill. A lot of that federal programs for NRCS, for FSA loans, even the program guidance has its original authorizing language in a previous Farm Bill. So one of the things I'd love to see is a broader understanding or addressing of the issues of some of the historical inequities. And by that, agriculture is an extremely efficient sector. And if you go back and look, and agriculture exploded in terms of efficiency. When I say efficiency, I'm talking about people growing from what we would consider a small farm, which was in the 1950s, about 200 acres, 250 acres, to a larger farm, doubling. It doubled. If you look at that time period, average farm size went from roughly 250 up to a larger level to around 500 acres. And so one of the things that you also saw was a large decline in those number of farms. But one of the struggles for many marginalized farmers, if you couldn't get access to USDA programs to get a farm loan, then you couldn't go out and buy additional acreage. If you couldn't get access to loan or programs, you couldn't go and enhance the land that you were operating to enhance your yields, to enhance your profitability. And so if you think about the cumulative effect of not being able to get larger or not making your resources more productive, it's going to keep your profit margins at a smaller level, which is going to allow you, or it's going to restrict you from reinvesting into your business. And so cumulatively, that's why if you look at today and you see that many of our socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, especially Black farmers, they're smaller in acreage. They're not smaller because those farmers are not as good at farming. They're smaller because they've been systematically limited in their ability to expand. I hear farmers all the time say the best ground is already gone. The best ground, the most fertile ground, the most level ground, the land that drains well with good soil quality. Uh, that ground has already been gobbled up. So if I'm trying to farm and farming on what we consider marginal ground, it's less productive. I have to work it a little bit harder. I may have to rotate a lot more frequency. I may have to add additional inputs to get my yields up. And even those yields, even then, may not come to some of my counterparts on more productive ground. So I would hope that we can have some programs and processes to really look at that cumulative disadvantage that has occurred over the years, over the decades, that have restricted farmers from being as productive and as successful as possible. I would hope, even in our current legal or political environment, that we can look and say that it's okay to have certain programs in place to help address historical inequities. I would hope that we could find a way to address that, not only to the farms and ranches, but also to our land grant institutions. As I understand, there's still inequities that still occur there between 1862 and 1890 funding. Hopefully we can get those things corrected. Hopefully we can broaden and be more specific with the language that comes out. A number of grants and contracts that come out to our farms and our nonprofit or community-based organizations that serve farmers, they come out of the Farm Bill. Hopefully we can get more specific language that helps address some of those needs that more greatly impact our marginal lives, or our historically, I don't want to use the term historically underserved. I want to use the term those farmers that have suffered from systemic discrimination, that have suffered from lack of access. Because there's a number of farms that are quote unquote underserved that aren't in the large commercial scale, but there's a group of farms that have suffered systemic discrimination.
Right.
From the program policy designs, from the access or lack thereof access. And I think it's just devastating when you look at the decline in farm numbers and you look at the systems as an economist to understand the business processes that drive that farm profitability. And you see that a lot of the things that drove those farms either out of business or to operate very small farms is the lack of access. And so hopefully we can really look at that and look for some ways to be innovative, think outside the box in areas like farm financing, even small, diversified farmer financing. Are there options that we can come up with to really help farmers truly innovate? Because even in a very wealthy country like we are in the United States, we still have a number of food insecure areas. And if you go back and if you look at maps, oftentimes those food insecure areas are high poverty areas as well, that trace all the way back, and those are areas where there is intense commercial row crop agriculture that goes all the way back to the turn of the century. So going back to post-slavery, to the plantation system. So you have these extractive services that is not diversified. Those landowners in those areas are operating smaller farms. Usually they haven't had market access that they can successfully engage in large-scale commercial ag, so they've often ventured into specialty crops. And even there, their market access has been limited, sometimes with some systemic issues in terms of their ability to gain access. So hopefully we can look at some things in terms of market access, look at things in terms of how we help our farmers and ranchers gain access to some of the latest technologies and innovations that can help them innovate in different ways so that they can have vibrant businesses that they can pass on as legacies to their children.
That's good stuff, Dr. Rainey. Let's talk about how we can get more Black youth involved in agriculture. You mentioned that you grew up being a part of 4-H. So how do we get 4-H, particularly 4-H in agriculture, in more of our schools? Just kind of talk about some of the services that the University of Arkansas 4-H program provides and just how we can get more Black
No,
youth involved.
no, indeed. So I'll just stand. I'll qualify my comments. I'm a beneficiary of being a 4-H member, lifelong. Grew up waiting to become 9 years old so I could join my local 4-H club because that's what my big brothers and big sisters were in, and that's a starting point. One, we need to see more of our Black and brown kids seeing 4-H. Something else that was very transformational for me is that my agricultural agent was a Black ag agent. So one of my first teachers, all throughout high school, I had one teacher that was African American. My ag agent throughout my entire 4-H experience was a Black man. And so as you look at that, so I say, one, expose 4-H to kids, but two, we need to challenge both our 1890s and our 1862s with putting those 4-H faculty before students and exposing them to it, exposing people in leadership roles to those kids so they can see someone that looks like them.
Yes.
So that was a tremendous. So I said I grew up participating in 4-H and in FFA. I never really considered pursuing any professional career with FFA. A 4-H was an option to me, or something that I was interested in. One, because my first ag agent was an African American man, but also my oldest sister worked within Extension, so I was very familiar with the county Extension office and that structure. And so that experience led me to have a very open mind and, more importantly, an understanding of what Extension and what 4-H could offer me. It took me on my first trip to the University of Arkansas, which is where I went to college. And so just those opportunities for experiential learning, I think it's an opportunity that we need to address. Unfortunately, even in my state of Arkansas, I'll say it, that if you look at the Delta of Arkansas, where primarily African Americans reside, I would say we have less activity in our 4-H program. That's something that I would hope that they're looking at as to how do we provide that access to those youth to understand about agriculture and beyond that about 4-H, because 4-H is a pathway that I think can open the door to even broaden their definition of agriculture, because a lot of people think of agriculture as just the cows and the plows.
Right.
Technology today has many components of STEM that are a part of agriculture. Drones, irrigation systems, sales, the chemical or the soil analysis. So you talk about biology. So all the areas of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics play a role in agriculture. And in a state like Arkansas, agriculture, I would say, is probably our number one industry when you look at not just the production side of it, but the value-added processing. So think of all the systems that play. And I love to do this whenever I'm doing a meeting. Sometimes I'll ask how many people, especially when I got consumers in the room, I'll say, how many people in the room are part of agriculture? And usually the farmers will raise their hand. And then I'll ask the question, how many of you ate this morning? Everybody raises their hand. I said, if you ate, then you're part of agriculture. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I think we have to really have that conversation with our kids, that I understand if you don't want to put your hands in the soil and maybe go out and work in the fields or the orchards or on the ranches. But there's many other avenues that you can earn a really nice lifestyle.
Yes, indeed.
Really nice career, being aligned with the field of agriculture, because we're always going to have to eat, and so as a sustainable field is always going to be here, and just like any other field, it's evolving. And so even as we do this podcast, communications, understanding of
Absolutely.
agriculture, to have those conversations about it, sales reps, marketing, there's a whole host of areas that you could be aligned or involved with agriculture to help grow, pursue a career, and feed your families.
Well, Dr. Rainey, this has been one informative interview and podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully I've helped in some way. And feel free to reach out to me again, but thank you for this time.
I sure will. Thank you so much. Thank you to our guests for joining me today. And the viewers, just thank you so much for tuning in. Scan the QR code to follow the Policy Center on all our social media platforms, Facebook, IG, and Twitter. And be sure to subscribe, like, and share our YouTube channel at the Policy Center Live to watch this episode's, previous episodes, and future episodes to come. We'll see you next time on the Policy Center Live.